Imagine the soft creak of an old wooden door opening, revealing a world of courtly intrigue, whispered secrets, and endless political maneuvering. In the middle of it all stands a woman, her sharp eyes scanning the room, her posture poised, her every word carefully measured. This woman, Sarah Jennings, was more than just a noblewoman in the 17th century English court. She was a force to be reckoned with. From a humble beginning in Hertfordshire to the halls of power, Sarah carved a path through a world that was often stacked against women, using her wit, ambition, and sheer tenacity to rise above the crowd. But as her influence grew, so did the challenges, leading to a life marked by both dazzling triumphs and heartbreaking betrayals. Sarah Jennings was born on a warm June day in 1660 in the county of Hertfordshire into a modestly noble but far from wealthy family. Her parents, though possessing lineage respectable enough to grant them entry into the fringes of high society, did not command extravagant wealth or numerous estates. This mixture of gentle birth and limited means would shape young Sarah's worldview. She possessed both the aspiration to rise and the awareness that in Restoration England, only wit, charm, or cunning, often all three, could help a girl from her background gain real traction. Even from an early age, Sarah displayed an uncommon poise, a lively intelligence, and a certain directness of speech that, while captivating, could also ruffle feathers. Family acquaintances noted that she had a quiet confidence, as though she already sensed she was destined for something extraordinary. By the time Sarah turned 13, fortune intervened in a way that would change her life, and in many ways, the course of British political history. In 1673, she secured a position at court as a maid of honor to Mary of Modena, then Duchess of York and wife to James, Duke of York, the future James II. These were intriguing days at the English court. The restoration that had brought Charles II to the throne had returned a certain frivolity to royal life after the gray strictures of the Protectorate. Yet beneath the cheerful veneer of masks and dancing, deep religious and political currents ran strong. The Duke of York was Catholic, a fact that stirred paranoia among a populace fearful of a renewed Catholic monarchy, and Mary of Modena herself, also Catholic, was eyed with suspicion. For Sarah, newly arrived, it was an unsettling but exhilarating environment. She was quickly introduced to the swirl of intrigue, learning how alliances were forged over shared confidences and undone by a careless word. It was in this sphere, where every gesture and whisper could be magnified by rumor, that Sarah's talent for conversation, her calm yet earnest gaze, and her flair for connecting with powerful individuals propelled her forward. She learned how to carefully choose her friends and, more importantly, how to secure their loyalty. The court was brimming with ambitious courtiers, each hoping to catch the attention of a prince or princess. Sarah, still in her early teens, balanced that ambition with a certain sincerity. People found her refreshing. She was neither fawning nor overawed by titles. That combination of self-assurance and courtesy helped her navigate the complexities of palace life far better than many older, more experienced courtiers. It was not long before a fateful bond began to form. Though it would take several years to fully blossom, Sarah was introduced to the Lady Anne, the younger daughter of James, Duke of York. Princess Anne was around Sarah's age, shy, and prone to bouts of melancholy. She had lost her mother at a young age, had a somewhat formal relationship with her stepmother Mary of Modena, and she gravitated toward those who could offer genuine warmth and companionship. In Sarah, she found someone who treated her as an equal, a friend rather than just a princess. Though they were not yet inseparable, the seeds of trust were sown. No one could have guessed that this quiet bond between two teenage girls, one a princess, the other a relatively obscure maid of honor, would one day remake the face of English politics. Meanwhile, in these same corridors, Sarah encountered John Churchill, a dashing young army officer. He was the son of Winston Churchill, not to be confused with the modern statesman bearing that name centuries later. And Elizabeth Drake, part of a well-connected but not extravagantly wealthy family. Handsome, ambitious, and already showing promise on the battlefield, John Churchill had something else in abundance: charm. He and Sarah found themselves drawn to one another, discovering in each other a mixture of fervor and sincere emotional attachment that was somewhat rare in that world of arranged matches. When they decided to marry in 1677, Sarah was still only 17, a marriage born of genuine affection, rather than sheer political calculation, was unusual. The union made some wonder how they would survive financially. Yet the pair was determined, buoyed by real devotion. Despite the practical hardships, Sarah and John would, over time, become one of the most formidable power couples in British history. As soon after her marriage, Sarah continued her presence at court. Her husband, though outranked by many older officers, was finding more and more opportunities for active military duty. The political climate was heating up. James, Duke of York, was inching closer to the throne as Charles II aged without legitimate heirs. Factions coalesced around those who feared James's Catholic faith, suspecting he would attempt to restore Catholic dominance in England. Many, meanwhile, saw him as the lawful successor, deserving of the crown by right of birth. Sarah navigated these tensions carefully, mindful of her position as a servant to Mary of Modena, and aware that an incautious word could jeopardize her and her husband's prospects. During the 1680s, her relationship with Princess Anne deepened. Anne was older now, no longer the shy child princess, but still in need of sympathetic companionship. She had married Prince George of Denmark, an amiable but not particularly dynamic figure, and the couple's frequent misfortunes in childbearing, Anne suffered numerous miscarriages and lost several children in infancy, wore heavily on her spirits. In Sarah, she found a fiercely loyal friend who would be unafraid to speak honestly, and perhaps more crucially, to listen attentively. They developed the habit of calling each other by pseudonyms. Anne was Mrs. Morley, and Sarah was Mrs. Freeman, to evoke a sense of equality between them, a psychological escape from the rigid hierarchy of the court. These intimate pet names were more than playful code. They symbolized the unusual power dynamic in which Sarah, nominally a subject, could speak freely, sometimes bluntly, to a royal princess. Everything changed in 1688 with the Glorious Revolution, an event that reshaped the monarchy itself. James II, the Catholic king, was deposed, and William of Orange, married to James's elder daughter Mary, took the throne as William III, with Mary II as co-monarch. Anne, as Mary's sister, was next in line. Sarah and John Churchill, reading the winds astutely, aligned themselves with William and Mary, though John's early loyalties had been with James II. The result? John Churchill's star began to rise. He became a trusted military commander, and Sarah remained close to Anne, who had her own separate household now. The shifting political sands did not undermine Sarah's place. Indeed, they helped elevate it. But the real turning point arrived in 1702, when Anne succeeded William III, who died childless in the aftermath of Mary II's earlier passing. Now, Sarah's dear friend was on the throne, crowned Queen Anne, sovereign of England, Scotland, until the Act of Union 1707 created Great Britain, and Ireland. The close bond they had nurtured for years catapulted Sarah into an unprecedented position. Almost overnight, she became one of the most powerful figures in the new Queen's court. Anne appointed her keeper of the privy purse, effectively giving Sarah control over the Queen's private finances, an enormous lever of power and influence. Moreover, Sarah's husband, John Churchill, now found his military genius recognized on an international scale, as war broke out on the continent over the Spanish succession. In 1702, John was named Captain General of the Army. Later, following his brilliant victory at Blenheim in 1704, an achievement that stunned Europe, he was elevated to Duke of Marlborough, and Sarah, by extension, became Duchess of Marlborough. These triumphs brought immense wealth. Parliament, grateful for John Churchill's victories, granted funds for the construction of a palatial estate to honor his exploits. That estate would become Blenheim Palace, one of the grandest examples of Baroque architecture in England. Sarah, engaged in the oversight of the building project, reveled in the power to shape a physical monument to her family's achievements. Yet the extravagance of Blenheim would also become a symbol of her and her husband's possibly overreaching ambition. People whispered that Sarah's pride was growing in step with the palace's rising walls. Even so, for several years, Sarah remained the central pivot at court. She was outspoken, assertive, and openly championed the Whigs, a political party that emphasized a stronger role for Parliament and a militantly anti-French policy in foreign affairs. Anne, however, though she had Whig sympathies, was never as staunchly partisan. As Queen, she often longed for a gentler approach or wanted to consider Tory viewpoints. Sarah, ever frank and sometimes abrasive, pushed Anne relentlessly to follow the Whig line, using every emotional lever at her disposal. This effort to transform their private friendship into political pressure began to wear on Anne, who found Sarah's overbearing manner increasingly hard to bear. At the same time, new figures started appearing in Anne's personal circle. Chief among them was Abigail Hill, who, in a twist of genealogical fate, was actually Sarah's cousin, though from a much humbler background. Abigail had initially been introduced into Anne's household with Sarah's help, presumably as a subordinate figure. But as Anne grew weary of Sarah's harangues and demands, she found in the softly spoken, attentive Abigail a soothing presence. Abigail did not question her decisions, did not browbeat her about politics, and seemed content to serve quietly without overshadowing the Queen. Inevitably, Anne's affections began to shift, provoking Sarah to furious outbursts. To Sarah, losing her friend was both a personal betrayal and a political catastrophe. She feared that Abigail, the quiet sycophant, was stealthily supplanting her in the Queen's heart, and also aligning with the Tory faction that Sarah despised. Her attempts to discredit Abigail only alienated Anne further. At one point, Sarah even insinuated that Anne's closeness to Abigail was of a sexual nature. In the moral climate of the early 1700s, an accusation of lesbian intimacy at court was scandalous in the extreme, and it speaks to Sarah's desperation and fury that she would fling such a charge against her former friend, the Queen. This did not endear her to Anne. Their relationship, which had begun with such warmth, now roiled with anger and distrust. By 1707, the fractures between Sarah and Anne were palpable. Arguments erupted over trivialities, like Sarah's refusal to vacate certain apartments or her abrupt tone with the Queen at public events. Yet deeper resentments lay beneath Saint-Frefaux, manipulated, humiliated, and overshadowed by Sarah's brazen manner. Sarah felt betrayed that Anne's son, once so pliable to her suggestions, now turned away from her counsel. Meanwhile, the Tory politicians of these led by figures like Robert Harwood, seized the opportunity to push Sarah aside and reduce the Duke of Marlborough's influence. And in 1711, the final break arrived. Sarah was stripped of her offices at court and losing her role as keeper of the privy purse and all official positions. The Queen demanded that she and her husband vacate their apartments at St. James's Palace. This was a moment of deep humiliation for Sarah, but she refused to surrender gracefully. She delivered lengthy defenses of her actions, trying to justify her stewardship of the privy purse. She claimed she had always spent money in the Queen's best interests, but her critics were eager to believe she had enriched herself, funneling funds into her own coffers. And the Marlboroughs had indeed grown spectacularly wealthy, some from legitimate grants and victories, some from questionable manipulations. Allegations arose that Sarah had misused funds for personal extravagances, a rumor her enemies happily spread. The once admired Duchess now stood accused of corruption, arrogance, and ingratitude toward the Queen who had lifted her so high. By 1713, facing a hostile Tory government, Sarah and John Churchill left England to travel in Europe. They spent time in the Low Countries and the German states, in part because John continued to be recognized internationally for his military prowess and also to avoid the unpleasantness at home. Rumor had it that the Duchess fled just ahead of legal proceedings, though no formal indictment materialized in the end. For Sarah, it must have been a bitter exile, forced to watch from afar as her enemies triumphed at court. Queen Anne, for her part, was not in good health, often plagued by gout and obesity, yet she clung stubbornly to her new favorites. During these years, Sarah endured devastating personal tragedies. She had borne 7 children, but 4 died young. Most heartbreaking was the loss of her only surviving son, John Churchill, Marquis of Blandford, who succumbed to smallpox in 1703 at the age of 17. This was not just a personal blow, but also a dynastic crisis. The Marlborough line had pinned its hopes on this young man, expecting him to carry forward the legacy and titles they had so painstakingly amassed. With his death, the continuity of the Churchill heritage faced an abrupt obstacle. They would rely on their daughters' marriages to preserve the family's influence. As for the daughters, Sarah was famously controlling, sometimes interfering in their marriages for what she believed were the best political or social advantages. These tactics, not surprisingly, caused tension within the family. After 1716, John Churchill suffered a series of strokes, which led to partial paralysis and severely weakened his once robust frame. Sarah was forced to become the primary guardian of their fortune and interests, a role she took on with her usual determination. The Duke's mind sometimes wandered, and he withdrew from public life. Though a reconciliation with the Queen had once seemed possible, such a thing grew ever more remote, especially since Queen Anne died in 1714 without Sarah having returned to grace. The new monarch, George I, ascended the throne that same year. He was indifferent toward the Marlboroughs, but the power structure shifted in ways that allowed the Duke of Marlborough to remain a wealthy, if somewhat sidelined figure. In 1722, John Churchill died at the age of 72. The official cause was a final stroke, ending a life that had seen him become one of the greatest generals in European history. Sarah was left a widow at 62 with immense wealth, but also a profound sense of isolation. She had sparred with so many over the decades that her circle of genuine friends had shriveled. Her relationship with her surviving daughters was often strained. Political disagreements combined with Sarah's need to direct their choices so created persistent friction. Like Sarah found it difficult to cede authority to anyone else's perspective, even her adult children's, and this controlling nature hardened with age. She lived another 22 years, a formidable dowager duchess who remained a figure of fascination and sometimes dread. She refused multiple proposals of remarriage, perhaps most famously from the Duke of Somerset, retorting that she would not marry again unless the King or Queen of Spain rose from the dead. Such a quip highlights Sarah's unshakable pride and her refusal to let anyone else dominate her life. She was widely known for her sharp tongue, which never softened with old age. Gout and other ailments dogged her, but she was not one to complain meekly. If anything, ill health sharpened her already acerbic temper. Various companions, secretaries, and servants came and went, often leaving with tales of her outbursts and demands. Yet beneath the crusty exterior of her later years, there remained a certain sadness. The same woman who had once danced in the corridors with Princess Anne, exchanging affectionate letters as Mrs. Freeman and Mrs. Morley, now found herself haunted by betrayal. On both sides, she must have wondered how it had all unraveled. She was also haunted by the memory of her lost son and the children who had died too young. Her lavish dwellings, such as Marlborough House in London, and the ongoing construction and refinement of Blenheim Palace, did little to dispel a growing sense of solitude. She had wealth, but the cost in friendship and joy had been high. The greatness she had once wielded at court felt like a relic. On October 18th, 1744, Sarah Churchill died at Marlborough House, aged 84. She left behind a complicated legacy, towering sums of money, enormous estates, a fractured family, and an enduring historical reputation as one of the most influential women ever to grace, or possibly terrorize, the English court. In her will, she played favorites among her descendants, particularly favoring her grandson John Spencer. That line would eventually lead to the Spencers of Althorp and, centuries later, Diana, Princess of Wales. Some might say it was her final act of controlling the future, bestowing benefits on those she deemed worthy and snubbing those she felt had spurned her. And so, the story of Sarah Churchill stands as both cautionary tale and bold testament. In her unwavering ascent, she tested the boundaries of personal friendship and political maneuvering, reaping both dazzling success and gut-wrenching downfall. She soared above almost every other woman of her generation, discovering that altitude comes with a terrible cost. The memory of her life, its grandeur, its heartbreak, endures in the stately corridors of Blenheim Palace, in the manuscripts detailing her finances and quarrels, in the whispered echoes of a friendship that once burned brilliantly in the royal apartments. Whether one chooses to see her as a hero, a villain, or a deeply complicated individual shaped by the swirling tides of history, it's impossible to deny that Sarah Churchill's remarkable journey helped define an era. And though her final years were marked by bitterness and solitude, the sheer scale of her accomplishments and the longevity of her reputation prove that she was, indeed, a formidable duchess, a queen's confidant, and ultimately, a legend in her own right.